what we are certainly going to see is at least some kind of simulation from the Russian side that they are willing to negotiate, because this whole new negotiation effort from a Russian perspective really served the purpose of averting increased pressure from the United States and Europe. And so far it has been successful. Pretending to be willing to negotiate from the Russian side makes actually much more sense than just refusing any negotiation proposal from the outset.
Mm-hmm. Interesting optics yesterday ahead of this meeting. Vladimir Putin decided to visit the troops, went to a battlefield command post, and grew visibly angry and emotional based on the reporting that we've seen here after a commander reported that Ukrainian soldiers were dying by the hundreds, their bodies littering the tree lines. This is a tragedy, he said, with the Ukrainian audience, I guess, in mind. A tragedy for the Ukrainian people connected to the criminal policies of the thieving junta that seized power in Kyiv. This doesn't sound like somebody who's prepared to sit across the table from President Zelensky, does it?
No, and it also signals that from Russia's perspective, there's no future for a Western Ukraine, even if Ukraine accepts a Russian occupation and de facto control over Eastern Ukraine. That Vladimir Putin does not see a future for Western Ukraine as a free society that can choose freely its leaders, freely its alliances, and is liberal, democratic, and prosperous. He wants to have all of Ukraine under his control, either militarily in the east or politically by influencing Ukrainian elections, by weakening the Ukrainian state after any ceasefire agreement on Russian terms has been found. So this is a ceasefire would, from Russia's perspective, just be a different continuation of warfare, political warfare, for the west of Ukraine instead of military warfare in the east of Ukraine.
Well, as Russia continues to make military advances, it's why he was in the battlefield, to show off the momentum that his troops are enjoying. In what world does anyone think that Vladimir Putin wants to negotiate or bring this to an end?
So apparently the administration, the US administration, does see such signs of willingness to negotiate. But the problem here really is that the US negotiation team seems to be very open of taking Russian demands at face value, and seems much more reluctant to accept Ukrainian and European red line. So if you go into a negotiation with the assumption that you just have to pressure the weaker side enough to make a compromise work that basically undermines Ukraine's existence as an independent state, then of course you can get an outcome. And that is what we are seeing right now. That is what the Europeans and the Ukrainians are pushing against. And now we have to see how the Kremlin is playing this new proposal, if he's trying to drag out negotiations, Vladimir Putin, or if he tries another way of averting pressure from Russia and trying to achieve his still maximalist gains in Ukraine.
So what are you going to be watching after this meeting? Steve Witkoff is going to call the boss, obviously, and then we'll get presumably a readout from President Trump on Truth Social. How different will that read than what we hear from the Russians?
So in the past, Vladimir Putin has not been particularly smart about meeting with Trump and negotiating these ideas. In Alaska, remember, he apparently, as was reported, entertained Trump with historical lessons for a really long time, something that Trump obviously is not interested in at all, distorted historical lessons, all the more about Ukraine belonging to Russia and so on. So I'll be watching if Vladimir Putin has become a little bit more flexible tactically, if he sees the need, to give the Trump administration more reason to believe that he's actually willing to negotiate, or if he's just going back to his maximalist talk about a Ukrainian junta, about the need for Russia to occupy all of Ukraine's east, and the end of any military support for Ukraine by Western allies. I think it will be difficult to spin maximalist Russian position as a success for the Trump administration. But if they don't get that, it would be the third failed attempt to negotiate over Ukraine, which then might result in another round of frustration and perhaps increased pressure on Russia, thinking tomahawks here, thinking the Congress sanctions bill on Russia.
Just lastly, Liana, this is the 6th visit for Steve Witkoff, who has said openly that he's a big fan of Vladimir Putin. I think they met for 6.5 hours at one point. I don't know what kind of a party is going on over there or what kind of a meeting is going on over there, but when you see two people get close like this, what is the other side? What do Ukrainians make of Steve Witkoff? Do they trust him?
From a Ukrainian perspective, I think the main problem with Witkoff is that he lacks expertise. It's difficult for him to really distinguish what is a Russian bluff, what is a Russian lie, and what is the actual reality. He also does not have advisors around him or note takers who can not only help with some fact checking of Vladimir Putin, but also some note take on what the Russian side actually says. In the past, there has been confusion about issues that Witkoff reported back to the United States, a willingness to compromise from the Russian side, which is not actually what the Russians or what Vladimir Putin has said. So Witkoff, from a Ukrainian perspective, is an unreliable negotiator who tends to be too open from a Ukrainian perspective for Russian positions and does not fully seem to understand the history of the conflict and also the history of Russian imperial ambitions in the region fully well. Yeah.